Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Chikawa. It's a pleasure to be here. Normally, I give a lecture very similar to the one that Peter just gave about the intensification of New York, and I wrote a book a couple of years ago about urban policy and lectured quite a bit on that book. But what I found is that when you lecture about things like intensification, which I very much believe in, I very much believe that cities are really a global salvation and can help us in terms of prosperity, in terms of sustainability, in terms of social change. But what I find is that people, especially in our dense cities today, feel overwhelmed. They feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the times in which we live. And what I mean by that is the world has always been a complex place. But today, because of especially technology, we have a view into the complexity of the world and the world beyond us in a way that we never have before. So this, for instance, is the best known image we have of the universe compiled in 2012, and it gives a staggering idea of how expansive our universe is. This is an image of only 3 minutes of Twitter downloads in cities across the world. This is actually an image of the internet, and what it is representing are server connections across the world, and the colors represent different continents. So in other words, the red is Asia, the green is Europe, the blue is the Americas, and one of the things that I find very interesting about this image is the white are the unknown. And this is the Human Genome Project, talk about the unknown, where we can actually map one of the most complex things that we know, our own biology. And then, as we've moved past the Cold War order and understand the extraordinary complexity of our times, this is a map of ISIS movements throughout Iraq, and trying to understand the absolute bewilderment of the times we live in. And that all of that impacts the way we think about our cities. And as I said, I believe very much in density intensification. This is an image of Kowloon walled city, the most dense environment ever created by humankind. Most of us don't live at that kind of density. The 7 billion of us live in quite a scattered array across the planet in terms of how we use land. And in my book, I talk about the fact that if all 7 billion of us lived not at skyscraper density, but actually only about sort of 3 or 4 story brownstone density, about 75 units to the hectare, that all 7 billion of us could fit in the state of Texas in the United States. Now, I'm stating that not to suggest that we all move to Texas and that we leave the rest of the world for agriculture and nature, but to actually say that how we live in terms of density, I think, will actually dictate the future of the world. And if we can live in a more dense way, we will certainly lower our carbon impact and create a better planet. But what I found in talking to people about that is that density or intensification, depending on how you talk about it, has a namelessness and a facelessness that scares people. And I think one of our obligations as designers is to understand, this is an image of the human fingerprint, understand how the human imprint can make itself known in terms of the dense world in which we are moving into that Professor Chikawa described across our cities, across our world. And as architects, we spent much of the 20th century struggling and debating over issues of style, became lost in that world, and really, I think, lost our way in terms of understanding the true beauty, and I will sort of use this very dangerous word beauty, to talk about how beauty could actually, in the 21st and 22nd century, be a way in which people can embrace the complexity of the world, not deny it, not be reductive about it, but actually find a lens into it. And I feel that in order to do that, that we no longer need Superman. It is not about the architect as superhero, but in fact we need the Avengers. We need an extraordinary group of skills, men, women, people of all different orientations and races and skills, to try to give us that beauty, to give us that lens into the complexity. And in fact, it may not be about 4 or 5 Avengers, but in fact an entire world of different skill sets where it's not just about architects and engineers and bureaucrats, but the biologist and the chef and the poet. And these are images from our studio, and this is very much what we try to build, where not everyone is an architect and people come from very, very diverse backgrounds and mindsets, all towards this idea of building a better city, of building a city that's inclusive, that's green, that's dense, that's transit-based, that's culturally based. And we don't have these cities in the world. It is an asymptote. It is something towards which we are all moving. And I think there are many lessons to learn, especially from here in Japan. This is an image of a farming village outside of Narita. And instantly you see the sort of grace and social beauty of the farmers living together, farming the fields outside of their village. And you understand how sustainable an environment like this, dense as it is, even though it's a fairly small-scale environment relative to the big cities that we're talking about here today. So I believe from this you can extrapolate lessons. Lessons that we should not live out in this horizontal sprawl and try to use technology and windmills and solar panels to try to fix that very 20th century model on the left, but in fact use our cities to not only build densely, but to leave nature natural, to be able to access nature in a much more direct way directly outside of our cities, connected largely by train. At the same time, we understand that the hub and spoke model of our cities is actually changing. This idea that people live outside of our cities and commute into a central business district every day. This is changing very rapidly, and you saw it in all of the images that Dr. Ichikawa showed about all of these various cities, that we are moving into, especially because of technology, a networked city model, where throughout a big city, you can find an archipelago, a series of islands of places where people live, work, and play across many districts, and I think this is reflective of what London has been doing in terms of Eastern London. So in New York, we have tried to build the Hudson Yards area. This is an extension of the existing subway line, the expansion of the High Line Park, which just opened 2 weeks ago into its third phase into Hudson Yards. This is under construction. This is some 4 million square meters of new city that's being developed as a mixed-use place built around a series of parks by the west side of Manhattan. But what you understand is as you try to build cities of that complexity, of that size, and with those kinds of ambitions, that the bureaucracy can be overwhelming, and that one needs, again, that interdisciplinary approach to deal with what is a very complex regulatory structure that every single city has today. We, in many ways, started this kind of work in Lower Manhattan after the events of 9/11. Where we had to rediscover our waterfront as a means of bringing more amenity to Lower Manhattan in the aftermath of the tragedy of 9/11. And much of this was discontinuous. It was hard to access. There was a highway between where one needed to get from the city out to the water. And then these are these images quickly of the waterfront that we built along Lower Manhattan, including a new pier that's really quite beautiful, very public, not very large in size, fairly low budget, with public space at both levels. And then next to it, an old shopping mall that's also changing and moving away from the old internal idea of shopping where everyone is trapped kind of in a place, and instead breaking it down and again using this beautiful glass shutter system to open up during nice weather. And always opening and embracing the complexity of the city, not trying to enclose and control the city. This is Essex Crossing or Seward Park, which Professor Ichikawa mentioned, a large housing project including much social housing, a senior housing project connected to the subway. And this is an initial sketch that again talks about how do we bring a set of complexities into the section of the city, also how do we bring light and air into the city and down into the subway and this new market. So this is work for the city in terms of that big light scoop, bringing light down into the subway level with new food and retail experiences there. Or across the river, the Domino Project. I was very interested in what Professor Ichikawa showed in terms of the 5 kilometers and the 10 kilometers. We're really rediscovering the area in that 10-kilometer belt outside of Manhattan. And this is part of a new waterfront for Brooklyn. This was the previously approved plan for this. This is 3 million square feet or 300,000 square meters of new development, all centered on a heritage building, an old factory called the Domino Sugar Plant. And we actually proposed to the city that the buildings go higher to get them out of the floodplain, and also to build about 6.6 acres of new parkland along the waterfront, and also to aerate the building. So every building in the master plan has an aperture in it to bring light and air. It's not to end the access at La Défense or to make a big iconic statement like CCTV, but in fact a very performative function of bringing light and air back to the neighborhood. And we tried very carefully to move and interpret the complexity of the city in terms of the lower scale of this neighborhood, the kind of scale of the bridge and the factory, and then the scale of the skyline. And so this master plan was approved with taller buildings, but again, a quite glorious park, and the factory in the middle. And what's important about this is not just housing. This is housing and office space, independent retailers, a school, a community center. It's really about building neighborhood. And how these buildings meet the street, critically important in terms of building that neighborhood, with a very heavy emphasis on bicycling and walking. So it's not even about using the subway to reach Manhattan, but again, kind of its own node within the larger network of the city, and a way of identifying the place using the old industrial artifacts. And this, again, will be a technology hub. We at Columbia did a study that said that 85% of our new technology jobs are in heritage buildings, are in pre-war buildings, because those people don't actually want to be in tall towers. They want to be in a different kind of work environment. And so this is something we're very much trying to build in New York. And we're also trying to emphasize a new skyline in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is sort of the next chapter in New York's history, if you will. We're also starting to understand, well, what does it mean to build a responsible tower? What does it mean to build a tower that's really part of our city? And we've looked to some of the great towers of New York to understand this, that it's not just a building out efficiently the program of the tower, but using the structure and then layering on elements that actually give it a much greater depth and complexity. And so this is a kind of diagram of what we're trying to build in terms of our work with towers. This is on 57th Street, a kind of super luxury project next to a heritage site, the Steinway building. And this shows how we're trying to use the form of this. This is a tower that will be 1,400 feet tall, and actually will have views through to both the park and the city in terms of its served and servant relationships. This is an aspect ratio of 1 to 23, so the east and west facades are almost all sheer wall with open expanses to the north and to the south. But again, we were very focused on the materiality and understanding what is both great about old New York and new New York, and worked with the facade. This is a terracotta facade. It's a built-up facade to create a kind of complexity on the oblique. So when one sees it from the side, you'll see this dance of light and shadow. And you see this terracotta and bronze facade. But this is a historic material used in a 21st century way. Only computers can create these terracotta profiles. And so you see that this is quite an elaborate structure that warps and wefts as it moves up the side of the building. But to me, the most important thing is how that new building relates to the mass of the city and grounds it in New York. This is a tower that could not be in Dubai or Shanghai or Mumbai. It is of, by, and for New York City. With an elaborate top that, again, is meant to be expressive, not just a flat top with light coming through it, with a great responsibility in terms of being worthy of New York's skyline. So if that's a super luxury project, this is Hunters Point South in Queens. This is a completely affordable housing project. It's 100% social housing, again, with a school and a park near it. This was a city competition. Again, you see a lot of emphasis on bicycling and how people move around this complex. Very difficult in terms of budget and getting architecture to simple things like the use of color, very important. Or in Atlantic Yards, this is one of our great experiments. This is going to be the tallest modular housing project in the world. It's about 37 stories, so this is prefabricated housing, again, affordable housing. That rises about 37 stories. This is a structural steel frame, and then these modules are built in a nearby factory by union labor, Overp was the engineer and has the patent on the connections for these modules that are carried by truck to the site. It's still very high quality housing. In fact, I would argue it's better quality, and when you're in it, you'll never know you're in a modular housing project. It will feel very normal. But we believe that these modules, and that's the first module going in place, which is, again, part of the new economy of New York City, this maker economy of building things right in New York. But this is under construction right now, and we're very excited about it because we believe it can lower construction costs for affordable housing by 20 to 25%. This is directly adjacent to the Barclays Center. This is the project I'm going to sort of leave you with. This is completed. It's a 20,000 seat arena that's the first arena in the United States that has no parking associated with it. There's not one single car parking space. It sits on top of 11 subway lines that all converge. And the whole idea was to take that standard form of a sports arena, which usually is a black box. It usually closes itself to the city. But instead, it uses this kind of double helix to open itself out to the city, both at the ground level and then in the upper concourses of the building. And then there's this very exuberant moment, this very important moment, where it comes out and meets where the transit connection is, in something that we call the oculus. And so the idea is that when people come through this new subway, and the developer paid about $50 million for this subway extension, people will come out into this plaza and they will immediately see daylight. They will also very immediately see the scoreboard, because people, of course, if they're late to the game, they want to understand, what's the score? And so we very much tried to concentrate everything on the arena floor itself. Everything is very muted inside of the arena because we decided that we would think about sports as theater, a kind of theater where you don't know what the ending is going to be. And so this, again, creates this sense of civic joy, of shared delight in the kind of complexity of the times we live in. And so this is a Beyoncé concert. This is the opening night with Jay-Z. And then talk about exuberance, this is Cher. And in terms of the expression of this building, we very much care about that kind of exuberance. And again, look to the materials of Brooklyn. But in a very 21st century way. The building is made of Core-10 steel. This is only possible because of the computer. And so we modeled this in a program called CATIA, which is the same kind of software that's used to design aircraft and vehicles. This is the Core-10 being treated for rust protection. And this is actually the way this was fabricated. So it is designed on the computer, and it goes directly to the metal fabricator. There's no middleman in between. And this is why this building, which actually had quite a low budget for this kind of building, was able to have this kind of exuberance. We actually designed a software program so that you could track every single piece of the Core-10 steel as it arrived on the site. And so this is 12,000 different curved panels in this rain screen that came by truck, sat on these mega panels, and was constructed into a skin that is very much the color of downtown Brooklyn, but then at night becomes something very different and becomes quite luminous. But to me, what's important about this kind of city building is that it is part of the city and integrates into the city in terms of new and old, high and low, and that this is something that's very important if we're going to talk about intensification, that people need to feel the texture and the kind of delight of a place like this. And this is the plaza. This is the last slide of my presentation. And I always end with this because, to me, this is about how a building in a city becomes more than itself. That its plaza, how it relates to mass transit, how it relates to the neighborhoods around it, creates a sense of civic delight. And perhaps in the complexity of our times, gives us a window in terms of how we think about the world in which we live. Thank you very much.